He just decided, you know what, I'm going to stop taking questions. And then he's swaying to Ave Maria and YMCA for about half an hour. Folks are standing there not sure what's happening. Can you imagine if I did that? You would be worried if your grandpa was acting like this.
Now he is ducking debates and canceling interviews. Come on. And check this out. His own campaign team recently said it is because of exhaustion. Well, if you are exhausted on the campaign trail, it raises real questions about whether you are fit for the toughest job in the world. Come on. Come on.
It is a great question. Is Donald Trump fit enough mentally and physically for the toughest job in the world? We're back with Natasha Alford and Christina Greer. Look, ladies, 2 weeks ago, I said the 25th Amendment looms large because J.D. Vance is a smart guy, and we all know that he knows Donald Trump is an old 78 years old, and it's an automatic presidency for J.D. Vance if he can get Donald Trump shoved out of that job, assuming that they actually make it across that finish line in November. You know, Natasha, it does make us legitimately concerned because people spend so much damn time talking about Joe Biden's age and fitness to serve. And yet we see with our own eyes what happens when Donald Trump now doesn't do interviews, sways at rallies for 30 to 40 minutes to music, and he's avoiding the spotlight.
I think people have always confused the bluster and his ability to speak loudly and speak to people's emotions with competence, right? His supporters portray that as competence, but really think about it. He is just a professional instigator. He is a professional con man, right? He stirs up anger, he stirs up resentment, but very, very few examples of what he would actually do to solve problems. I think he also oversimplifies really complex and nuanced issues like immigration, so that he's essentially exploiting people who don't understand the complexities of these issues, offering really simple solutions and scapegoats for why we have the problems that we do in the United States of America. So he's never actually been an effective leader. He's just been a really good salesperson of simple ideas. And unfortunately, there are people who have fallen prey to that.
And, you know, Christina, one of the terrifying things, because I'm glad that Natasha brought up immigration, is calling people the enemy within. But he doesn't limit it to just immigrants. He brings all of us in, the socialist, leftist, Marxists that are the Democrats, and he shows and he tells his supporters that we are, as Americans, if we don't support him, that we are domestic enemies. I'm going to play very quickly some of the sound that we have from that interview that Kamala Harris did with Bret Baier at Fox News.
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy.
I mean, Christina, first of all, it was wrong for Bret Baier to not play the right clip during that interview. And I'm not even going to say that he apologized because he didn't. Later on, he said it was my team's problem that played the wrong clip. Putting aside the mansplaining that came at the same time, too, and the constant interruptions, this is a serious issue because Donald Trump has promised, either in writing through Project 2025 and through his own words, that he's a dictator on day one. And the loyalists that are going to help him do what he plans to do, it's not just mass deportations of immigrants. It's rounding up people like us that dare to speak up and out against him.
Absolutely. But there's so many of his supporters who want that, right? I mean, don't forget, when Donald Trump first became president, his first order of business was an executive order for a Muslim ban. And it was the courts that actually said that's an overreach. So what's so dangerous is that during the first term of Donald Trump, when it was a smash and grab, and he didn't really understand how unified government worked, and he didn't really utilize Congress, thank goodness, he thought that he could just have things over edict. And there were lots of Republicans who were like, this is a stopgap. There are reasons why the framers put these sort of checks and balances in place. Read Federalist 51. But this time, he's got the bottom of the barrel type folks who do not care about democracy. And you mentioned J.D. Vance. You don't get J.D. Vance. We're talking about J.D. Vance / Peter Thiel. Right? We're talking about billionaires who have a real investment because they recognize
Elon Musk
putting
all
Musk,
this money in the
who's on the
PACs.
stump,
Yep.
an immigrant himself, by the way, just like many of Donald
like
Trump's ex-wives.
Melania Trump,
right?
too.
So we know that the types of people that are surrounding Donald Trump in a potential second Donald Trump presidency are incredibly dangerous because they don't respect the will of law. And this will be a methodical dismantling of American democracy. So it goes beyond just journalists and institutions.
Oh, yeah.
It is, when he threw out the word fascism, every accusation of Donald Trump is a confession. Every single time. He needs to be the hero and the victim simultaneously. So whenever he says that the Democrats are, doing X, Y, and Z, and they're going after us, and they're unfair, and they want to change the country, that is because he knows that's what he wants to do. And so we have to take him seriously. And I think the hard work that, say, Natasha's doing with her dad, but everyone in the next 2 to 2.5 weeks, they have to make sure that their loved ones have a voting plan, that they get it, that they're working on the infrastructure, people like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, but that we can't take any vote for granted because there are still some people who are quietly on the fence who just don't know if a woman could lead this powerful nation. But he is the alternative. And it's not a scare tactic. It's a reality and a policy perspective that we must lay out for people, specifically who are thinking that maybe it wasn't that bad. We sort of have COVID brain when it comes to a Donald Trump presidency. We don't remember just how terrible it is. And we're starting to see it, actually, when you look at the FDA and even our food from some of the policies that he made many, many years ago. Chickens are coming home to roost. And it's
Natasha,
terrible.
I got less than a minute, but no, it's great. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Of course. Well, when Dr. Greer was talking, I was thinking of the poll that said there was a third of Americans who believed in the immigrants poisoning the blood.
The dehumanization of the immigrants.
Comment.
Yep.
Right? So what he's doing is strategic, that he's not dumb in that sense. He is playing on historical stereotypes, fears, xenophobia that has been part of the American story. There has always been somebody who's a group of people who've been scapegoated. And so Donald Trump knows that in this moment, that's what he needs to do, is to stir up that fear, stir up that resentment. So that way you have voters who are distracted over here and not asking about what his solutions are.
Well, the us versus them has worked before, not just in the United States, but in other countries. But they've seen it worked through fascists, dictators, autocrats. And that's the way, though, that have led to scores of people being exterminated. Using that verb. I use that verb because exactly what's happened. Christina Greer, Dr. Christina Greer. Thank you, Natasha.
I like
no. We got to do that. Dr. Christina Greer and Natasha Alford making her maiden voyage on the Katie Phang Show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, both of you.